One more lightning talk before our coffee break, and this is going to be somebody who is an agile evangelist, a UI enthusiast, a speaker and a regular blogger. So another musician in our speaker lineup. You play the clarinet and saxophone and also played as part of a band at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, which is awesome. We've got Carly Richmond, developer advocate of Elastic. Are they really using it? Monitoring digital experience to determine feature effectiveness. Give it up for Carly.
Oh dear. Hey, there's my slides. Fab. Okay. You don't want to see my notes, do you? I do, though. Okay, hello everyone. So thank you for the introduction. As was said, my name is Carly Richmond, and I'm here today to talk about a problem that I used to have as a front-end engineer. So there was two things I struggled with when I built not just features for internal users that worked at the same company when I worked in banking, but also people that were outside of the bank. I always wanted to know if my features were actually being used. You know, from a selfish standpoint, we've spent so much time and effort building something, we want to know if it's actually used. But also it means that we can maybe make decisions about switching things off. But we also want to know if things are performant, and sometimes we don't always really do enough in performance tuning to try and look and see how we can do that. So I'm going to talk about different types of tools today that you can use to answer some of those questions. But before that, I'm going to have to apologize because I am going to talk about Christmas in October. Hear me out, okay? So when I worked in banking, what I found was we'd be doing regular reviews, we would be chatting about the new features that were coming up, we'd be getting feedback from all of our users, and depending on whether they liked a feature or not was exactly like when we give gifts at Christmas. You know, if it's something that someone really wants, that they adore, you hear about it. They say thank you. I actually literally would get emails with pictures and screenshots showing my features and how they'd used it for different things because they were super excited. Just like when you send a selfie to your mum and go, thank you for the jumper. But if it's the jumper that your gran gives you that was absolutely hideous and you know is going to get donated when you come back home after Christmas, you don't react that way. What do? Well, you smile, you nod, and you kind of go, this is great. Please admit I'm not the only one that's giving the false jumper sentimentality. Thank you. So we need to find ways to, get more negative performance and issues out of the way early. And sometimes we can't just rely on people being honest with feedback. So one of the ways that we normally talk about trying to get ideas of performance and potential anti-patterns is Core Web Vitals. So who's heard of Core Web Vitals? Okay, half of the room. So these are a set of metrics which I'm not diving because I'm going through this at lightning speed today. But the whole idea is that these are metrics that allow us to have a rough idea from the user perspective if we have a generally performant site. And you can capture these at all sorts of different places. So you can use different tools, such as Google Lighthouse. You can capture them either, as a plugin within platforms like Netlify. You can run them as plugins on your CI. You can even run it out of Chrome developer tools. But see, if we're capturing those metrics against our app, it's probably too late. It's probably a performance issue you're going to have to dive through and fix. The other problem is, it doesn't really tell you what your users are actually doing with your application. It doesn't really give me that feeling of my users are using this. So another way to do that is something called synthetic monitoring. Who has heard of synthetic monitoring? No one. Oh, one, two, cool. For everyone else, it is your lucky day. So when I heard of monitoring at first, I would think about simply pinging an endpoint, a back-end API service to say, ooh, this is alive, hey, fantastic. But actually, with observability tools, depending on the provider, you can use end-to-end automation testing frameworks such as Selenium or Playwright, which is the example I've got up here, to run against your application, simulating the clicks and events that a user is going to do and then see every 50 minutes if that workflow is alive, as I've got from this example. And then you can see when something goes wrong, what is the error. And then the other nice thing is that you can actually see how long each individual step is taking. So anyone else who might have end-to-end testing experience in here, remember the degradation of your tests increasingly taking longer and longer. So being able to track, as you can see right up there in that corner, what your duration by step is and see if there's a potential degradation is actually quite useful in a production app. But there's one problem with end-to-end testing, aside from the degradation and other things we've talked about. One of the things that I find really annoying is that I would automate what I thought the users would actually do with my app, and they don't always do what you expect, which is why we have unintended errors. So that's why I'm telling you, despite the fact that it is still mid-morning, we need to crack out the RUM. No, I'm not talking about the favorite beverage of Mr. Jack Sparrow up here. I'm talking about something called real user monitoring. So who has heard of real user monitoring? Cool. So for those who haven't, this is where you use an agent embedded within your JavaScript application to basically capture the user behavior and activity. So I'm talking about things like navigations, error traces, clicks, and things like that. And then you can combine it with back-end telemetry information to get a full idea of what the application is doing, identify bottlenecks, all these other kind of cool things. Now, the state of the ecosystem as it is that you don't have an open agent. There's for back-end tracing, you can use OpenTelemetry, and there's agents for all sorts of different languages, including for JavaScript and Node. But for front-end, you have to use the vendor-specific one. But the premise is the same. It's going to send that telemetry information to an observability provider where your logs and everything else is, so we can see what's going on. So I'm going to walk through an example implementation with the Elastic agent because, well, it's on my T-shirt. But the basic idea is you install the agent via NPM within your package, so Elastic RUM here, and then you initialize it, naming the service so you can find it. If you've got multiple applications, maybe you've got a front end and several microservices, you need to see everything. You need to be able to specify where it's going. You can optionally specify the environment and service version, which can be nice for comparisons, identify degradations earlier. And because the RUM agent runs on single origin, in order to make sure you get full front-to-back tracing, you also need to use the distributed tracing origin in this case to make sure that it attaches the appropriate header onto the HTTP request to come back. But you also need to watch out for framework-specific extensions. And since we're at React, we should talk about the React one, right? So here it is here. So this is the version for React Router DOM version 6, where basically you just wrap it with the APM routes option via the APM RUM React extension on the top. If you're using 5 or earlier, you need to use an APM route for each individual route. So that's just something to watch out for. And then for OpenTelemetry, for the backend, basically you can use either manual or automatic. So this is the example with automatic. So you specify that you're using the OpenTelemetry protocol for your traces and metrics, specify where it's going, specify the token for the header, specify what resources you want to pick up the detection options for, and then, same as we did before, specify that name of that component, and then use the require option to start it up. So I said that I used to work as a software engineer, and I had so many different issues that I had to try and dig through with just logs alone, or profiling through in Chrome, and it was an absolute nightmare. And actually, if I could hop back in my DeLorean and go back in time, this would be the kind of things I would be capturing. So those core web vitals, which I never paid attention to and really should have in hindsight, I actually am able to see these against the live traffic within these kind of user experience dashboards within an observability provider. So I don't need to run Lighthouse maybe as often. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but hey, here we go. I'm able to see the trace. So remember I talked about where's the bottleneck? Is it front end? Is it back end? If you make sure that you combine that OpenTelemetry tracing with the front end RUM traces, you can actually see the amount of time each JavaScript element is loading. You can also see the amount of time taken up for calls to a back-end service, if it's been triggered multiple times, things like that. I can see page views. I can see agent information. I used to build apps in the days when you had to still support Internet Explorer, so this was actually very useful to see if people were still using Internet Explorer. True story. You can see error information and what the culprit is, how often it's happening, is there a pattern? And you can also get the page load duration by region, which for me was also useful to see where in the world people were actually using my application. So I've walked through OpenTelemetry, I've walked through real user monitoring and a couple of other things at lightning speed. But the thing I want to warn you about with these is that it's not for spying on users and getting all, why aren't you using my stuff? This is all about trying to make our apps better. So you can use it as a means for a conversation to say, oh, what do you think about this? I see maybe you're not using it as much in order to make the app better. With that, I will be on the discourse if anyone has any questions. If not, thank you very much.